Blog Talk Radio.
Good evening, listeners. Thank you for taking the time to listen to our broadcast this evening. I am the sorceresscagliastro, blood sorceress, necromancer in the hands of 9. And let me say that it is an honor for me to be on the air with tonight Rogue Ostrowski, my co-host. How are you this evening, Chris?
Oh, not bad, sorceress. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. And, of course, we have our science officer and our producer, Morgan St.Knight. Good evening, Morgan.
Good evening, Morgan. Good evening, sorceress. A pleasure, as always, to be with you. It's one of those days for me, so I may phase in and out.
This is one of those things that I love about live radio. I think Victor is not with us this evening. Yes, he's got other things he has to handle, but when he's not with us, he is sorely missed. So I'll just say hello to Victor, even though he is not with us tonight. Tonight's show is an interesting one because, not that most of them aren't interesting, but it deals with a subject that is so pervasive when it comes to any kind of interaction with the material, the sorcery, magic, whatever one calls their path. Tonight's show is breaking the work which has been done upon you, sorcery debris. I have a number of clients who come to me because people have been working on them for either a brief time or a long time. And by working on them, I mean using some manner of sorcery or whatever their path is to create an aspect in the individual's life which is not pleasing. We aren't talking about the kind of sorcery that's done for healing or for anticipation of good and positive things. We're talking about the kind of sorcery that's done upon someone to, in some way, deconstruct the sanity of their life, whether it's done upon their love life or their personal, other areas of their personal life, or it's done on their business life, all manner of things such as that. This kind of sorcery is interesting because it creates such chaos that the chaos itself causes splinters, and by splinters I mean tangential reactions to the process. For example, if someone hurts themselves, they all of a sudden develop some kind of panic, and then they overprotect that part of themselves that's hurt. And this is just one of many of the kinds of things that happen with the debris of sorcery on the level of starting to overprotect the self and all manner of things. And we're going to talk about all that tonight. But my point is that there are methods in which to create environments around the self where these kinds of things can be cleared away. Sometimes clients come to me with 20-year-old sorcery that's been done on them. Is it still in effect? I guess we'll talk about that tonight. The question is it still in effect, or are they still affected by it? And in that sense, is there a gray line there? Are they still protecting that knee because that's where the sorcery came to them? And I don't mean specifically a knee. I mean the portion of their life that's been injured or hit by this kind of sorcery. So as we move forward tonight, I think it's really important to remember a couple of things. And first of all, this kind of sorcery is prevalent. There is a great deal of it. Many people are affected by this sort of thing. Many people are in a situation where they don't even really realize what it is that's on them that makes them feel so broken. Sometimes clients come to me and they say things like, I have terrible luck. I no longer accept the concept of luck any more than I accept the concept of coincidence. It's not about luck. But I do notice that even at the level of really putting in serious work and trying very hard, by which I define trying as that which one does in the focused effort to create an outcome that they choose to experience, that kind of trying, as opposed to the sort of whining, I'm trying, that kind of thing. But this is a phenomenon, in a sense, that people are affected with. They say, no matter what I do, I hit the wall. No matter what I reach for, I nearly grab it. I never have energy. I feel like I've met so many people and that lover has never attached to me. I go to job interviews and somehow it's just never right. All these kinds of things that I hear, and the first thing I look for is the damage, the debris from what's been done to them, if something has been done to them. Now, I want to say, as sort of a caveat to that, that is not always my first go-to. Many people come to me and they are saying that all of these things are not lining up for them, and often it is the work that they need to do themselves. However, the meat of the subject tonight is the sorcery that's been done upon people, the magic, the whatever the path is that's been used, been laid upon them, for which they need to deal with repair. And that's my introduction for the night, and I will pass the gauntlet around and get everyone else's first thoughts. Chris, what are your thoughts?
Well, the first thing that I like to do when somebody comes to me in a situation where they think that there's something going on with them is, number one, I ask them who they piss off lately.
Good strategy. Good idea.
Because that's usually what it comes down to. Who have you been in contact with? Who are you having arguments with? And it's kind of like the same way that the police would conduct an interrogation. You always look at who has a grudge with you. Who's got a problem with you? Who would do this to you? Who do you know that can do this kind of thing? Is this something you put on yourself? People forget when they do spells that sometimes you got to get yourself out of the area. I mean, when I was in the Marines, I didn't pull the pin on the grenade and drop it in front of me. You had to throw that damn thing to get it away from you so you didn't get hurt in the process. It's the same way with some of the spell work that we do. If you don't stay out of the area where this is going to impact, you're going to get hit with it too. You don't have an instant built-in buffer just because you're the one that projected it. I mean, energy's energy. It's going to go where the course of the least resistance. And that's another thing I ask people, what have you been doing lately? What did you do? And when I like that you brought up about 20 years ago, this was done to me, blah, blah, blah. Have you been in contact with this person in the past 20 years? Do you even know this person is still alive? This has to be fed over a period of time. It loses some of its impact over the course of a few years. I mean, all spells have a half-life. They only last for so long. And some of the damage that's being done isn't so much that it's the work itself that's doing it to you. You're making the damage on your own self. You're the one that's you took over the spell and you're creating it yourself on you. It's not so much I have to undo what they did to you. You've got to undo what you did to you.
But they do come to us for guidance to do that.
Oh, yeah, they have to. I mean, they can't go to anybody else. This is something that you can't go to your doctor for. You can't go to you can't even go to clergy for because they don't know how to handle this.
No.
Say 10 Hail Marys and go sit in the third pew. You'll be all right. No.
Chris, with you, it's always the third pew. I just want to tell you that. I'm sorry, go ahead.
But that's where my Uncle Sil used to sit. And you ain't getting into that. But,
no, don't get into that. I have a lot of responses to what you've said tonight. So, and lots of tangents came off of that. It was all great stuff. Hang on a second. Let's see what Morgan's position is on this thing, and then I want to start to respond. That was great, Chris.
So in my tradition, voodoo and hoodoo, this is a huge part of the work that we do because people always think that someone is attacking them. One of the things that come to me is they say, oh, protect me because someone has put a curse on me. Well, by the time they've put the curse on you and it's embedded in your energy, it's too late for protection. Anything I do to seal it off is going to seal that curse in with you. So I have to detangle it, and I have to explain to them that, okay, first I'm going to detangle and undo what's been done, and then I have to protect you. Back in the old days, in voodoo and hoodoo, this was called turning the trick. Now, obviously, that has a different meaning nowadays. So you don't find too many practitioners who say, sit right there and I'm going to go out and turn the trick. Because everybody's going to go, well, that's great for you. You're going to get some extra spending money. How does that help me? But
I guess it matters on where you're shopping, huh, Morgan?
Yeah, it is. So, but actually, you never really hear current practitioners using that because that is an old term. But one of the things was back in the old days, too, the big way of laying a curse or a work on someone was to make sure you buried some sort of object in their yard, under their doorstep, under their bed, perhaps. This was back in the days when people didn't lock their doors, so it was very easy to sneak into someone's house. Nowadays, that isn't done. In fact, if you find something on your doorstep or you find a voodoo doll, it's probably intended that you find it, and that's really one of the key indications of a very weak sorcerer, because that's a person who's relying on the psychology rather than the actual power for it to be done. So this is, So this is one of those things that people come to me for all the time, and there are various methods for dealing with it, but the basic method is I have to detach that energy from the person and then seal them off so that it can't get back in.
Morgan, we're going to go back in a minute and talk about how we detach the energy. So keep that on, keep that idea in the front of what your notes or whatever you're writing. But I want to go back for a second and talk about bad blood. You've heard this term, bad blood. There's bad blood on me. And I want to add this in the mix because we have so much to talk about tonight in this area that I just want to put this in there also. Generational inheritance of curses, per se. My people love this. Italians love this. They all think that their great-great-grandmother was cursed by somebody on the side of the road and they're carrying it. So I'm not one to necessarily accept all of that to be true, although there are some sorts of sorcery that are set up to create this ongoing, the more people in the family, the more blood in the family, the richer the process becomes. So yes, there are some of those, but I often get people who say, 3 generations ago their grandmother had terrible luck and now they have it, and so therefore it must be the same thing. And, when that kind of thing happens, the amount of investigation that is required is important. We use divination in this process in a great deal, and this is something that you don't really hear people talk about, and this is how it should be talked about in so much as filling in all the blanks. If a client comes to me and says, I have all these things going on, the first thing I do is I use divination. And I use divination, and I use the one of the 4 pillars of my method of sorcery called the boxes, so that I can go back in time and I can really look at what's happened separate and apart from their story about what's happened, because there's always something different other than the story. Not because they're lying, it's because they don't have all the information. Well, sometimes they're lying, but rarely they are. By the time they come to me, they're usually pretty sure that they want to fix this thing, that they've come to other people. So when we get to this issue of what one is carrying and the issue that Chris brought up of doing this to themselves, these are enormously separate categories, and I want to be able to make sure that we cover a lot of this tonight. I want to make a comment about doing it to yourselves. This happens all the time. I had a client who came to me and was telling me all of these things that was going on in her life and her marriage and her daughter and all this stuff, and listening. And I'm looking at her and I'm seeing all kinds of other things around her. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, what's happening? And I said to her, tell me a little bit about your past. And she said, and she proceeded to tell me quite a bit about all of the kinds of sorcery that she has dabbled in. You know how I love that word? Dabbled in the last 10 years. So I said, so you pretty much went to sleep with your door open. And she started to understand what it was that I was saying regarding that. But the dabblers, this kind of a thing is so important and so much a part of what we're talking about tonight. I have said that dabbling in sorcery is like dabbling in surgery, Except when you dabble in surgery, the patient dies, and when you dabble in sorcery, it is more likely to affect the surgeon. And by dabbling, I don't mean just starting to learn. That's different. I mean having this idea that one knows what they're doing and jumping in with both feet and pulling stuff out of the air and thinking that they are going to be able to make these alignments correctly, the same alignments that those of us who have spent 10, 20, 30, 40 years working on, you know, in a night of reading in the dark with a candle. So when we talk about doing stuff to yourself, it is not always so benign. And I say all the time, you know, what have you been doing? Just like Chris does. What's happening here? And often I hear things like, oh yeah, well I've been dabbling in voodoo, which to me is just a sentence that wreaks nothing but havoc. Dabbling in voodoo, just like dabbling in surgery. So the dabblers, beware, because much of what's happening you're doing to yourself. You're opening these doors to yourself. Like I said, you're sleeping with the door open at night, and maybe even with the light on and the sign in the hallway that says free meat. So whoever wants to take that and run with it, and Morgan, you were saying something about too late for protection. Maybe we should talk about that for a second, unless Chris wants to take it. It's up to you guys.
Well, I'll go for it. The whole thing, the 2 layers of protect, well, it's basically a 2-step process. It's untangling the energy and then protecting the person, and that's a big thing. But as we're talking about people doing things to themselves, because a lot of it is, even if someone has done a work on someone else, on one of my clients, they're going to be feeding into it. If they are at all suspicious that something has been done, their fear is going to be feeding into it. So there are various techniques I use to help not only separate them and get rid of that energy and disentangle it, but also to calm them down. And these are things that are found not so much in voodoo specifically. In voodoo and hoodoo and a lot of the African diaspora religions, you have a lot of what are called despojos, which are bats. They're herbal baths that are used, and one of the ceremonies in voodoo is called lav tet, which means to wash the head, because the head is considered very integral to the person's whole well-being. And if your guardian angel, which is believed to reside in your head, is at all angered or disturbed or weakened or upset, it has to be refreshed. And one of the ways to do this is through bathing it with an herbal mixture. But one of the techniques I also use is called a barida, which is basically rubbing the person or stroking them with branches of certain plants. Their rue and basil and lavender and rosemary are some of the ones that I use. And this has the effect of removing the energy from the person, but it also gives them the physical reassurance. You know, I could just do the energy removal myself, but I find that touch is very important in these sorts of operations because I want to calm the person down. I want the person to be more centered so that they will be able to gather themselves back together instead of flying to pieces, and they will be able to focus and work towards their own good. That's something that's very important to me, as I've discussed in previous shows, is that my clients have to be part of the process. I don't just do the work on them or do the work for them. I expect them at certain points to take up the energy themselves and to continue it, because that's really what it's all about for me, to give them that sense of balance. So in terms of... I'm sorry?
No, go ahead.
Yes?
No, go ahead. I had a question. How does the work work? And I want to talk about this tonight. How does the work work? How does using those elements on them affect them? Does it change the energy around them? What is your idea about how the work works?
Well, it certainly does, because then their own energy kicks in. They get that reassurance. They feel that the things are being removed. And the burrito, it's also called a lapia in some cases, depending on what you're using. You can sometimes use an egg to do the same thing. And when you use an egg, very often the practice is to take the egg, rub it over the person a certain amount of times, and then crack it into a glass of water, and to read what happens when the strands of the white float up. And you were talking about divination earlier. This is one of the great divination tools that I've used, because it gives me a very good sense of what exactly the energy is that I'm working with. Is it a curse that someone else has put on them? Is it something they're doing to themselves? Have they come in contact, even innocently, with just some energy that is harmful to them? Because energy flows around us all the time, and it's very possible for them to come in contact with some sort of energy that attaches itself to them, whether it is sentient energy in the form of a demon or whether it is just plain old unincorporated energy that can still attach itself to them. This is one of the techniques I use for making sure that I understand exactly what I'm dealing with. But when I do these techniques, I can notice almost immediately that the energy within the person themselves changes very dramatically. And I think a lot of it does have to do with the psychological effects of the touch. That is very important and very calming to the person. So that's why it's an important tool in my diagnostic. But there is another element, too, is that they know that somebody is working for them, somebody is there caring about them and working with them. So it's not just the physical touch, but the psychological boost they get. And the energy usually perks up almost immediately once I start doing this sort of work.
So you're a much more hands-on person in the room kind of approach to things. Is more of the comfort zone, I think, for you.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that the client is at ease on all levels as much as possible.
Chris, what about you? Do you prefer the person in the room, or do you not prefer the person in the room? Because I have a lot to say about this.
Well, I can do it both ways. Sometimes it helps to have, for them, it helps to have the person in the room. Because with my background, I understand what Morgan's saying, with the hoodoo-based stuff, which I learned when I was a kid. But some of the other things that I've learned falls into the category of the part that I do as far as sin eating goes. Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily have to come into contact with you for that, because I work outside of a hands-on experience. That's a little bit deeper. A lot of times, if I'm in the room with somebody, if I have them in there, and I have things burning or whatever, that's for them. I don't need it. Mm-hmm. But as Morgan said, a lot of it has to do with the fact that they know that you're going to take care of it. I would venture a guess to say that 75% of the problem, or 75% of the cure to the problem, is them knowing that somebody is going to take care of it.
So there's a psychological component as delivered to the client?
Like most things, most diseases you can trace back to the mind at some point. I mean, the mind weaver, they either caused it or they'll overcome it, one of the two. So
I tend to stay away from that. I will say to clients, I'm working on you. They ask me what you're doing, and I say what you paid me for. And that seems to just be a big difference between the way that I work and the way that a lot of other people work. And I'm not saying that both of you tell your clients everything. You certainly do not. But I tend to try to stay away from assisting them in understanding what it is that I'm doing until it's over with, and then we talk about it. And sometimes they're excited about that, and they want to participate and learn how to do some of what I do. And sometimes they say, I wish you hadn't even told me that much. So it's an interesting thing to me how they perceive what's being done to them and what's necessary to be done. When I deal with clients, it doesn't matter to me if they're in the room or they're a million miles away. It's completely irrelevant to me. And if I feel like the comfort zone for them is to be a little bit more anonymous, then I will even more so suggest that they stay away. There are times where I won't even meet people on Skype when I'm going to do this kind of work. The whole thing has to be either email or on the phone. I want as little contact with them as possible because I'm working on something that was put upon them. I'm looking for the animal that's biting on their leg. That's what I'm looking for. So I have a very different approach in this way, that my preferred stance is distance. I deal with blood, and I go into the blood and I look at it and I say, okay, very much like I do with exorcism. What is here now that didn't come in with the package? What is attached to this entity, this person, this human being, which is an entity in and of itself, that wasn't there when they were born, wasn't there when they were in a mind of intention, wasn't there when they were, growing through the growth period of their lives. Like I said, for me, it's like looking for a wild animal biting them on the ankle. So when I get there, I use all manner of things I use the 4 pillars almost exclusively. I use the boxes. I go back in time. I look at what happened. I can see that. So we're talking about divination, but we're talking about divination in the sorcery process. It's a little different in my work because the divination in the sorcery process is part of the curative. When I go back in the boxes and I look at, say, something happened to them 8 years ago, arbitrary number, and I go back there and I look at it, the action of me being in the moment looking at it will change the moment. It will change the energy of the moment in this particular methodology. So I go into the boxes and I move back and I look at what's happening there, and I work all manner of things in the boxes. I work sigils, I work energy changes, I work some investigation work and see who it is that's screwing around with them, and then find what I consider to be the most important piece of the puzzle, which is it being maintained. There are people who will do sorcery on another person they hate for 20 years. They'll get up every morning and do it. And I don't know what kind of a life that is, but I know that it is a life that some people choose to be part of. So one of the things I'm looking at when I go back in the boxes, and some of the people who are listening and know what I do, know what the boxes are and have an awareness of that. And some people don't, and you can find that material in my book, so you could take a class, so you could ask me. And, this isn't really, the radio show is not really a time for teaching those kinds of techniques. But I'll go back as a vehicle, if you will, this experience called the boxes, and I'll look at it, and I'll participate in that moment. And I might, in that moment, find an individual who's doing work on them and take them out of the loop, change the outcome, change the connection, break the connection from the root. Because as people who deal with the degree of sorcery, we are in a constant state of having to trim away the twigs. This is bothering the person, get that out, this is bothering, and then as investigators in the work, we have to say, well, if these 3 things are bothering this person, I am feeling like this has something to do with a particular type of sorcery, a particular type of, Chris was using the word spell, I don't use that word, but for want of another track to go down, and say, well, all these little things mean something else, very much like a physician does, and they're trying to figure out what a patient's disease is. But that's not what I do. I go way back, and I pull it out at the root. Is it better? I don't know if it's better. It's effective for me. My clients feel an immediate break with the work, and this is what I want to ask both of you, is the time period and how this works. My clients feel an immediate break with the work. Sometimes the work takes phases in so much as there is more than one person working on them. And here is the caution that I take. If somebody has lived 20 years of their life with this thing hanging over their head, and it's affected their physicality, their wellness, their mental wellness, all kinds of issues of their wellness, and I just pull it out from under them, they're standing there in a new body with a new mind. And that is a dangerous thing to do because it changes the chemistry of who they are. So mattering on the weight of what went in, that is my response to the amount of time it takes to take it out. Any thoughts on that, guys?
Yeah, I don't like jerking everything out from under them right away, like you said. I think if you do it over time, it kind of gives them a little bit of room to adjust. I mean, especially if people have been living with this for a long time. I mean, they don't know any different anymore.
Mm-hmm. Right.
They have to get used to a whole new normal.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like that adjustment period that they need, I mean, I ain't saying drag it on for weeks on end, but it's like give it, 24 hours, 48 hours, something for them to kind of get used to as it happens. That it just doesn't happen, like in the first 5 minutes, whatever, because I don't think that's really that good for people either. I mean, if you think about it, you always have a recovery period after you have surgery, before you get up and start dancing around. It's like there's a reason for that.
Right.
I think the same thing should be done for what we do. I mean, you just can't take this off and expect people to go back on with their lives, especially when it's something that's been around forever or what seems like forever to them and has had some debilitating effects to it, in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
You just can't you just can't open up the door and push them back out. You know what I mean? You have to kind of give them some kind of time to adjust to it.
Right. There are occasions in which it takes weeks. I have 3 clients right now that I'm working over probably a 5 to 6 week period of time, because each one of them has experienced such horrific physical limitations from the work that's been done to them that I'm actually negotiating cell build time, what I understand about anatomy and how that all works. I'm actually watching as their bodies learn a new way to breathe freely again. Sometimes it does take that long, not often, but sometimes it does. And it is important to me to remember that I am not the one going through the healing. I'm not the one going through the change of the thing. I tend to say my whole attitude in life is, okay, what's next? What are we researching next? What are we writing next? What are we studying next? What are we talking about next? So I have to remember that I'm not the one standing there who couldn't breathe for 20 years and now can. And that I have to give pause to understanding the client themselves. And I'm curious as to Morgan's position on this, and then I want to talk about how the work works. Morgan, what is the time thing with you?
Well, in the way I work, there's an automatic sequence of events anyway, because most of the things I do are repeated in series of 3s or 9s. So if I give a client, say, an herbal bath to use, it has to be used for 9 nights in a row, but I have to see them at least a couple times during that process. Or if I'm doing what I mentioned before, the Limpio or the Bonita, I do a series of 3 to 9 of those. And this is something that a lot of my clients are already aware of, because many of them come, even if they are not active practitioners themselves, or heavily involved in it, they come from a culture in which they know kind of how the process works. So they almost know what to expect. So they're not put off when I say, well, it's going to take 9 of these sessions in order to get you back to where you should be. They understand that there's supposed to be a series, and that's very helpful. The people who don't come from that background sometimes are a little resistant, and they are the ones I often have trouble with, because they say, well, it was just too much for me to do it, so I only did 2 of the 9 baths. Is that enough? Well, no, I gave you 9 for a reason, so I didn't just do it because I was trying to get rid of these extra herbs. So a lot of this has to do with the client's willingness to accept the fact that there's going to be a time frame. Many of them do. If I can give them some immediate relief in the first session, which is typically the case, then they have that encouragement to go on, because they have reason to believe that's going to keep getting better. And that is typically how it works, is it lifts off gradually. So I don't have to worry about them having a withdrawal necessarily immediately. The only time I really do something abrupt is when I get the sense that the person is in immediate danger. That's very rare, because skilled practitioners working on the level that they can immediately cause harm are a rarity. They really are. We maybe in this circle that we're talking in, and we have 4 or 3 of us tonight here together, and then several people in the chat room who may be at the level. But if you look at the general population, there aren't that many out there. There are more people who do what we were talking about earlier, the dabbling. And, dabbling can backfire on you, but even when it backfires on you, you can still cause some damage. If you are one pissed off ex-lover or something, you can really do some damage if you've got that anger and energy going. But on the plus side, it's not very organized, it's not very well-focused, so it's even easier to remove.
That's true, because my work has an immediate punch, and you feel it at both ends. If I'm going to put somebody down, they're going to feel it right away. But if I'm doing this reversal work that we're talking about tonight, they do feel the immediate first wave of that. Sometimes what I'm doing is immediate, and they will just be repaired, mattering, like we had said before, of how deep and how long the process has been for them to be devastated and what they're feeling. But it's interesting that you say 3s and 9s, because 9 is the number that pretty much runs a lot of what goes on in the world with my attending demons. So when you said that, I had to respond. But my work is not based in as much material as yours is, Morgan. So I can't give them 9 of anything, but I do often give them time that is based that way. 3 days, 9 days, 9 hours, these kinds of things, not necessarily always those numbers, but just for cohesiveness in the conversation. I have a client now who I've got rolling dice 30 times a day and writing down all the numbers because it has something to do, a significance to do with the person who put this on them 8 years ago. So there's a lot of these kinds of techniques, these kinds of particular put-upons and things that are added to the technique that make the other person connect to the correct energy. Is some of it mind over matter? Absolutely. Is that what we're going for here? Absolutely not. It would be insane to say that there's never any mind over matter aspect here. When a person takes an aspirin, and an aspirin takes 43 minutes to work, and they start to feel better in 20 minutes, then what's happening is their sense of wellness and an agreement with wellness or an agreement with feeling better is kicking in. And yes, there's definitely some of that in this work. However, when there is a physiological change, when they all of a sudden, can walk and breathe and have a life again, then you know that the effect is much deeper than that. How do we connect that energy of what we're doing to what has been done to them? Your way of doing things seems very practical to me, Morgan, because when you are using a particular branch or a leaf or an herb or this kind of thing, and Chris does a lot of this as well, there is a particular vibration, a particular energy that goes with that thing. And and if it's not, we're not talking about cooking with it, we're talking about utilizing it in this way, and there's a collective consciousness around that. So that works, and I'll talk about how my work is different than that, but I'm interested in how the object connects. And Morgan has said a little bit about it. Chris, tell us about, you use a lot of very interesting things. You use a lot of herbs, but you use the earth that we stand on in a profound way, which is what I love about your work. So tell us about those connections and how it actually changes what happened to the person.
Well, as like Morgan was saying about the herbs and everything, if somebody's close by, if they're, that I can physically get to them, talk to them, whatever, that works pretty good. I mean, I can come up with some kind of compound. Here, drink this. You want to do this, here, have some jasmine tea and drink this 3 times a day, and you'll feel better in a couple of days. That kind of thing. But if I'm talking to somebody, like, say, out in Seattle, there's not a whole lot I can do with any kind of herb that way. I can tell you what to do over the phone. It's not the same thing because you really don't know, unless they have a background, they don't know what the hell I'm talking about. If I tell somebody, go to the store, get some mugwort, and I want you to burn that, they ain't going to know what the hell I'm talking about. Because you can't go to local grocery store and get a thing of mugwort.
Matters on where you live, I guess.
It's what?
And maybe it matters on where you live.
But that kind of thing I can't do. I can't do with somebody like that. So I've got to count on my abilities at that point. Mm-hmm. Sometimes what I do with people is I do like a distance healing where I get an impression of what a person looks like what their spirit looks like. I get it in my mind. I don't know. I can't go to your house, walk around, and tell you what the hell your living room looks like. But I can tell what you look like, and I can see what's wrong with you by looking from the outside in. And basically, what I do is I tear off the things from you that are wrapped around you. In my mind, they look like patches of, say, tar.
Uh-huh.
And I can pull that off and basically clean you up and take those things along with me once I'm done and get rid of them. And normally what I do is I send it back, go into a tree or go into the ground or, whatever, just to cast off the things that have been there. I can't hold on to them too long because I will suffer bad effects as anybody else will.
Now, let me ask you a question about that. You'll suffer bad effects as anybody else will, even if it doesn't belong to you, or are you just taking the physical energy off of them?
No, anything you take in is going to will affect you at some point in time. You know, just like everybody knows what secondhand cigarette smoke will do to you.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. You know, you take in somebody else's garbage long enough, you're going to feel it just as bad.
It's interesting because I don't really have that experience in quite the same way. When I get hurt because demons threw me around. And that happens more often than I like to talk about. Or things fall on me. I get burnt sometimes. That kind of thing happens. But I don't seem to take in the energy of the other person. And I think that the difference is this. I think that I am not interacting with the stuff. You take away their stuff. I don't do that.
Right.
I get in there and work at the blood level and have the blood change what it is experiencing. It's the clean out that's happening is happening at the internal and external level, but it isn't happening to me. I don't. You do the sin eating thing. I don't do that. I don't mean just, but I work with people and I change their physical presence in the experience and their timing and the chronology of the thing. And I push their energy around sometimes to batter them up a little bit if that needs to be done. And by batter them up, I mean to knock them around a bit to sort of wake them up into the experience of a new opportunity and feeling well and that kind of thing. But I never get involved with the energy. And I think that at the amount of this that I do, which is just about every single day of my life, it's a good thing that I don't get involved in the energy in the same way I think that you do. Morgan, do you get involved in the energy?
Well, I try not to. But as Chris pointed out, it's very easy to do it if you're doing hands-on approach or even if you're doing it from a location, because for us, energy distance makes no difference when there's energy work involved.
Right,
it's really not the pointer. So you might as well be in the same room with the person if you're taking their energy. But as I said, when I use the Roditas or the Lupias, when I use the herbs or the eggs, the thing to do is I always burn them. And that also helps the person, again, on a psychological level, see the thing that I've used to cleanse them as being burned. So this takes away the negative energy. When I'm using only hands work, or even if I'm not touching them, but using my hands to remove the energy from their body, there's a process I use in which I frequently dip my hands in water and I fling them out behind me. This is to remove the negative energy. And the water that I use is composed of not just plain water. It's actually spring water, ocean water, river water, and a cologne that's known as Florida water that's used in a lot of this work.
Sure.
And that helps. That helps to cleanse the energy away. But I want to get it off of me as quickly as possible. And that's only because if you keep it on you, if you think about it when you're cleaning a car and you use a single rag to do it, well, eventually, if that car is really dirty, that rag's going to get very dirty quickly, and then you're basically going to just be smearing the dirt all over as you go across the car. Whereas if you stop, you rinse the rag out, or you change the rag, you're going to be able to get rid of more of the dirt. You're going to be able to get rid of all of it rather than just smearing dirt all over the place because your rag is saturated with it. And that's the approach I take.
Now, what about effigies? Because I use effigies a lot. I don't know how the practice that both of you have is laid out so much, but I have a lot more clients in other countries than I have. Well, I have a lot of clients in America as well, but I have a lot of clients in other countries. So the proximity is definitely an issue, and I've based pretty much my whole practice in not having to see people right in front of me. I deal a lot with effigies. Sometimes the effigy is powered up, by which I mean someone will send me their blood, and their blood will be in the effigy. Sometimes they can't do that. I have worked with clients who cannot mail those kinds of materials, given whatever country they're in, this kind of thing, where it becomes very difficult to even provide those kinds of materials. I've had clients who cannot send me anything at all in that way because of where they live. Sometimes I will ask them to do that harvesting in an image so that I can see it and I can see the blood and I can work with that, and that's enough. So for me, everything is much more removed and automatic in so much as I deal specifically with physics. I don't deal with herbs at all, this kind of thing. Occasionally I'll have herbs in a ritual where I know that there's a collective consciousness of a particular thing that herb does. I mean, if you go to extremes and you think about herbs and roots and all sorts of things, and you think about things like arsenic, I mean, everyone knows what arsenic does. So there's a collective consciousness around arsenic. You don't even actually have to have it in sorcery. You just have to have something that represents it, and it works the same way. So my work is very different in that sense from both of yours, because there are very little things that I use. For me, it's all about magnets and iron and effigies. And I find this to be extraordinarily effective, this idea of effigies. Sometimes I don't feel the need to make an effigy, but a client will say to me, "What are you going to do?" And I say, "Well, this is one of the options." And they can actually help, because, Morgan, you mentioned the client helping. I don't rely much on that. I'm not saying you rely on it. I'm saying that it's not so much in my language to ask for it. However, you've made me think about something tonight, which is why this is great. When I use effigies, if I was not going to use one, but I've mentioned it as a possibility of one of the ways that I might work with someone, sometimes someone gets all excited and says, "Oh, do that one. I like that idea," and I can think about being in the doll. And they use the word doll. You know, for me, an effigy might just be a magnet assigned to someone. It's not necessarily a constructed anatomical creature that looks like a human, but the clients will enjoy on some level, or require on some level some kind of participation. So effigies are a big part of my thing. On my altar, it's just pretty much piles of magnets and metal. That's what it is. And the occasional sculpture that makes sense only to me, that it's even there or that it's present. So do either of you use effigies at all in your work, either when someone is in your presence or when they're not? Thoughts?
I have used effigies as far as if I'm working in place of the client, like I have somebody that needs something taken care of, and this is the person that did it to me. Can you help me take care of that? So I don't have any kind of contact physically or any other way with the person that I'm trying to get rid of. I will use an effigy, because that way I don't have to have contact. I don't have to worry about energy. I don't have to worry about any kind of cross-contamination whatsoever. I can use this in order to manifest what I have to use. With the client, though, I know somebody that's a very good friend of mine that keeps asking me how I know things before everybody else does, and there's a reason for that, because I do have that contact with people, and it serves me really well, and I don't think I would use an effigy, because I don't think I would get the same effect. Because I lose that disconnect. That I have that disconnect, and I don't know what's going on at that point. That's kind of how I keep track of how things are progressing.
I see.
If I do healing work on somebody, if I just cut it off at one point, I don't know how they're progressing. You can tell how good they're feeling, if it's getting better, if it's getting worse. That's how I get my positive and my negative reinforcement from that. That way I know I'm doing the right thing. If it's like they don't feel right, or they don't feel like they're getting better, then I know I have to do something different. Something isn't working right. And you look like a fool. You look like a fool if you're calling up somebody all the time. Hey, how you feel today? How you feel today? You can't do that. I mean, that's not what we do. I mean, we look like a bunch of idiots.
I've never done that. Nope.
But you know what I mean. You just can't do that. So
right.
It's nice to have that little bit of a connection that you can say, oh, okay, well then, and I know that you're feeling better, so I don't have to worry about that. Or wait a minute, you're feeling worse. Well, okay, what did I miss? I can go back and go say, okay, now what did I miss? What am I not seeing? Something's here that I missed the first time. It's almost like a self-check.
My clients tend to call me and tell me every single thing that they're feeling. Well, they don't call me, they send me emails and tell me every single thing that they're feeling during the process. whether I want to know or not. So, and sometimes I say to them, okay, that's about all I need for today. Thank you. I'm very clear about when enough is enough. What happens when? Let me ask Morgan that question first regarding effigies. What do you?
Well,
do you use them?
Yeah, because what I deal with, and people are very clear about what I deal with, and I bring up making a doll, they get a little nervous.
Yeah.
So
however,
I do, after the work is done, there is something I offer as an option, and it's called, a folksy little term, it's called the little soul doll, for lack of a better word. And that is actually an image of the person, which they help me make by donating their hair, saliva, blood, fingernails. And I make this, and I help them, and they watch me while I make it, so they know that I'm not keeping any of this aside to use for nefarious purposes later. I just like to make sure they're calm on that. And we make it together, and then they take it home, and they put it in an honored or a safe place in their house. And I tell them to take care of it, because they're essentially taking care of themselves when they're doing this. This is something that gives some people comfort, and a surprising number of people like to do this. The one downside is when something happens to that doll, if there's a fire and the doll is destroyed, or if it's for some reason stolen, especially if it's stolen, because you never know, but people may, that's why I tell them to keep it in a safe place where not too many people know where it is. But if it's stolen, you never know what someone's going to do with it. So there has to be this whole process of actually disconnecting themselves from it so it can't be used against them, or they don't have to feel that just because the doll was destroyed that something bad is going to happen to them. But that's another step in the process. And I warned them about it ahead of time. But still, a lot of people are willing to take that, which I take as a good sign, because it's a sign that they're willing to take responsibility for their own well-being.
Yeah, that's very true. That is very true, that they're willing to take responsibility for their own well-being. I request that people end their communication with the very person with whom they feel has done this work on them. You would be surprised, although the two of you won't be surprised, listeners might be surprised, that people will say, oh, but I love him, or, oh, I can't let her go, she's all I think about. And I say, well, she tried to make your lungs a couple days ago, so maybe she's not loving you back. But I get a lot of this, more so from men. Men will come to me with great damage done to them by female, and they will say, oh, but I still love her, so maybe after this we can work it out. And I say, well, maybe after this you'll be lucky to be alive, and good show on that. But I see this kind of thing all the time. It makes me wonder about how involved in their own demise people can be. The energy of people's stuff, which comes from this conversation, is a big issue with me because people send me their blood, and I have their blood in my life while I'm doing this work. Not all the time. It is not always necessary, but there are times when it is. And recently I got some blood in the mail from a young woman, and I opened it up and I put it back in the envelope, and I put it in a new envelope, and I sent it right back to her. And when she got it back, she was startled, and I said to her, first of all, you're lying to me. Second of all, when I asked you for your blood, I wanted your blood, not the blood of somebody else that you live with, because I can tell exactly what it is that I have. So when things are given to you and you have these residual items, I don't know how much of these items you keep or you have to keep for a while. I mean, Morgan, you said you make these soul dolls. Is that what you call them?
Yeah, little soul dolls.
Little soul dolls, and you give them back their materials, but you still handled their biologicals.
Right.
So what do you think? What do you think about the handling of biologicals? I'd like to ask you both that, because I, of course, have quite a bit to say about that. That is something that I deal with all the time.
Well, I think it depends on, a lot of it for me depends on intent. If I'm there and I've already established the intent that we're going to be using this to help the person, I don't worry about it too much. And I don't, and if I've done my job correctly, then I shouldn't have to worry that something from their energy is going to come and attack me. But and this is always done in person, I have to say. I never have anybody send me anything through the mail, because I don't really do distance healings or distance works The best when that comes up, usually it's simply me giving advice by email or by message or by phone. So I don't really do the exact work, and I make it clear to them that if I can't be in your presence, that I'm not really going to be as effective as I should be. So I don't want to mislead them in that. So I don't have a problem with handling other people's biologicals, but it is kind of weird that when you think about it, I guess I don't think about it a lot because it's just been such a part of my life for decades, but it is kind of weird that someone would just go ahead and hand that right over. You know, here you go.
Yeah, it does seem odd to me, too. It does seem odd to me, too. People say, I've read all of your books. I've been listening to you for years, and I guess that has
And here's my blood. Yeah.
So here's my blood. I also get people do this other thing, which I find very strange, and I never accept it. People will send it to me as a gift. And this I do not get at all. And when someone does that, I say, well, no wonder you've had work done on you. You know, if that's the way that you live your life.
Yeah.
People have said to me a number of times, can I send you my blood as a gift? There was one woman from which I ordered, or I was going to be getting a sample of a particular sort of bath salt, and it was a project I was going to do, and she said she wanted to make this, so she made it. And when I got it, I did not open the container. I looked at the container, and it speaks to me the way many things do. And I said, uh-oh. And I sent her an email, and I said, is your blood in this stuff? And she said, oh, yeah, I added it as a gift. And I think to myself, well, that's very interesting. People send me or attempt to send me things made out of their hair. I can't even tell you what other things people have tried to send me. But they think it's some kind of honor for me to have their biological, and I say, do not leave your biological anywhere that you don't have complete control of the outcome. This is an insane thing to do. People get all kinds of stuff put upon them this way. I mean, there are people who just look for biologicals to use in sorcery. They don't even know whose biologicals they are. And I do come across people who do this, people who work in industries where they can get their hands on biologicals. This happens all the time. So, I urge any of you who are interested in not having work put upon you at the level of having access to your biologicals to take care as to where you leave them. These are important
While we're talking about that, I want to tell people that this is something I advise. I don't have a lot of upscale clients, but I have some who have housekeepers in that. I tell them, be careful. Don't leave your stuff around. Don't cut your nails into the toilet or something, and clean your hairbrush every day and your comb. And for God's sake, if you're going to have sex, take care not to leave the sheets stained or to have some. I mean, it's not always possible. I mean, when you're in the throes of passion, let's face it, no one's going to say, oh, but I don't want to get the sheets messy. But still, you got to watch it, because if you have made that housekeeper or that whoever it is mad at you and they get their hands on that, that's some powerful stuff that they can use against you. So that's why I'm very careful who I even let into my house. And and I have a guest bathroom, so the people go into that guest bathroom. I never use it. I don't do anything in that guest bathroom.
I can understand your point of view on that. You have to be very careful. I mean, people are very, very haphazard about where they leave their biologicals, and I do mean that on all manner of ways that you could think of them doing that. When I say to people who are involved in a number of casual physical relationships, and I say, well, did you leave your biologicals? And they laugh at me. They're like, of course I leave my biologicals. I'm like, you don't even know what that person is about, much less what they could possibly do with it. These are important things. When I've worked with someone's blood for a while, I don't ultimately send it back to them. I either burn it or bury it. We discuss what's going to happen to it. Sometimes, mattering on what the use of the blood is for, I will bury it in a cemetery as some sort of tribute. But that's if the blood is not contaminated, if it's not involved with necromancy or demon work, because those kinds of things you don't want to add to the disincarnate who are trying not to be part of these kinds of processes any longer. Just today I had to put up a status everywhere I could about the works of what one should and should not do in a cemetery, and who am I to say that? Well, I'll tell you who I am. I'm somebody who's been in service to the disincarnate for more decades than most people who've been practicing sorcery, and it is my right to say that because they tell me they don't like it. They don't want cemeteries used as amusement parks. So that was just sort of a side note, but I felt the need to even take this opportunity to reiterate that. It's very, very important stuff. But we do rituals where we bleed into graves. So this kind of thing is a whole other thing. I've spent nights on mausoleums, in mausoleums where I have bled into the stone, onto the stone, and given that as an invitation to participate in some kind of energy exchange with me to the disincarnate. So where do you not leave your biologicals? Where do you leave them? How powerful are they? Chris, do you work with people's biologicals at all?
Not as much as you two would, because here we still have a lot of the old Amish and Mennonite influence where, people don't even want to look in mirrors. It's like they're sure as hell not going to leave stuff like that laying around. And there's just enough influence from the newer populations of the Latino and the Haitian and the Dominican populations that are coming in, and including some of the African American population that's been here. Certain things you just don't touch. You just don't leave them laying around. You don't give them to anybody. People don't like exchanging. Some people don't even want to give you a picture of themselves.
Right.
Pennsylvania is one of the few states where if you get a driver's license, you can actually request to not have your picture on it because of a Quaker law against having your picture taken.
How does that work?
Well, it's against the religion to have your picture taken.
No,
That's
I understand how it works for the Quakers. I don't understand how it works for the state. I understand how it works for the Quakers. That's very interesting to me.
Like I said, it's just that they've pushed the issue, and the state said, okay, fine. If that's the way you want it, that's the way you want it. And, so we're not as eager to give up things like that. You got to work. If you want to get somebody's biologicals, you got to work for it. They're not going to hand it over to you real easily. Now I have obtained things that I needed, and people, if I ask them and I tell them what I need it for, they'll grudgingly, but I will get them. And I'm telling you, it's going to be the slightest, littlest amount that they can give. And 9 times out of 10, they're going to want it back.
Huh.
Whenever I'm done with what I'm doing, whatever's left over, they want it back.
Well, that's very protective. Well, I'd rather hear that than people being haphazard about it.
Yeah, I don't like it was stated in the chat room. I don't get gifts of belly button lint and earwax and things like that. People aren't real big on sending that stuff here.
Is that what's in the chat room tonight? I haven't seen the chat room.
I believe it was Darren said something about, here, have some belly button lint as a gift.
Oh, that's pretty creepy. Well, I have been offered semen on a number of occasions.
Yeah, and, but was that have to do with spell work, or was that?
Yes. Well, we're sticking with spell work.
I was going to say, so have I.
And people say to me, that's more powerful than my blood, so let me give you that. And I say, well, if I want that, I'll ask you for it. But, to the point that we get these kinds of things, one has to be careful about how much stuff is in their house, because we don't want to turn around and be the people that need to have debris removed. Because debris is something that can sneak up on you. It could be something that you think you had or you didn't know you had, and there it is. There's a degree of conversation of sorcery as well. I've had interviews with clients, and I say interviews because I don't do some work just because somebody called and wants me to do it. I do it, I have an interview and we say, let's talk about what the situation is and whether or not this is a solution I want to be part of. Sometimes I walk away from these conversations feeling like it's already stuck to me not in the sense that we were talking about before where, you feel like it's weighted on your energy, but just the knowledge of it, just the energy of the knowledge of it sometimes is already something that I have to be careful about because I work almost extraordinarily, almost exclusively rather in the sense of non-tools. Everything that I'm using is already in my mind. It's in my head. It's the way that I'm working. Also, for me, magnets will hold on to people's stuff. They'll hold on to people's energy, and I have to be careful of that as well. I have to do a lot of cleaning of my magnets because they will remember stuff. They will feel different to me than they felt the time before. This is really important. Do you have tools that you clean? Or
most of the tools that I use are things that are disposable. So whenever they're touching someone else, they're destroyed. Like I mentioned, I burn the herbs, or I break the egg, or if it's a bath that I'm giving someone, I tell them to. I give them cheesecloth to wrap it up in and tell them to throw it away, but they're not taking the bath in my tub. But
no.
As far as tools, we don't. I don't. In my work, tools. I have been working with magnets in that because I've been taking the lessons with you. But that's a very private thing, so no one touches those. But for the voodoo and hoodoo, we're not big on tools. If we have implements, 9 out of 10 times they're going to be on an altar to a specific Wawa or a Risha. They'll be the daggers that I keep on the altar to a Zilidanto, or the small machete that I keep for Papa Ogun. But no one touches those. It's understood that those are for the spirits to use, not for us to use.
Right, of course. I love the term small machete, by the way. Something about that just sounded very interesting to me. Not in any way, shape, or form to mock what you said, but the idea of a small machete to me is very interesting.
It's all relative.
Oh, yeah.
It's not 10 feet long.
Chris, do you have anything you want to add to all that about tools? Is Chris still on? Do we lose Chris?
I have.
Hello? There you are.
Yeah, I'm here. Hello?
No, I didn't. I couldn't hear you. I'm sorry.
I have a knife that I don't know if you call it a machete, but it's an old Bowie knife that was my great-grandfather's. And I kind of keep that handy for protection when I'm doing certain things. To be honest, I can't tell you if it actually does keep protection, if it's just that it's nice to have, because it was something that he carried, and he was in World War I and a couple other things when he was in the military. So it's kind of nice to have that handy, As far as anything that I use, a lot of what I use is myself. So basically the only thing I'm cleansing is me. So I have to take care that I do remove the things that I've accumulated, because as I learned later on in my life, the things that I did when I was younger come back and haunt you when you get older. So I'm a little bit more wiser and a little bit more careful than what I was before. And I make sure that what I do now, I get rid of as soon as possible instead of waiting.
I see. Morgan, are you wise? I want to ask Morgan a question based on what you just said, Chris. I'll come right back to you. Morgan, are you wiser and more careful now?
Oh, certainly. Yeah, I have to say, it's when I first started doing things so many years ago, I was pretty careless with what I let people do, what I let people touch, even as I was trying to help them. And I'm really surprised that I didn't have some riposte from it. Not that they would necessarily themselves be trying to do anything to me, but just the fact that we had talked about it earlier, what Chris said, that whatever's on them can come and get you sometimes. If they've been casting spells and you're in their heart and you happen to be in that circle of people they're casting spells on, well, even if you're not the target, you can get the backlash. And if a spell has been cast on them, if you're not very careful, you can get the backlash too. And I use the term spell, but really work is what it really is.
Right.
But but for common parlance, most people say spell. I don't know. Ever since I've been working with you, I've definitely been a lot more careful with what I do with people because it's your books have opened my eyes up to the possibilities of things that I didn't even really consider early on, as far as
Thank you.
Our use of magnetism and even our own personal magnetism when we get down to it, because we are part of the magnet. And we are all connected in some way, I believe, through that.
Right.
And that's why we're able to do work on other people. But the thing is, if you're not careful and you're not looking out for what's going on, you can tap yourself in accidentally to some energy that you don't want to be in, just with the most altruistic of intentions, trying to help someone else. You can get part of what's on them.
Chris, you're more careful now? You think you are more careful now? Maybe I'm not understanding the word careful. I find it fascinating. Are you more careful now?
Yeah, I used to run in, guns a-blazing and all that kind of stuff before, and I don't do that so much anymore. I mean, some of the times I would come home when I was done doing things, I'm tired, I'm going to go to bed, instead of trying to take off what I accumulated. Right. Putting things away like I should, like the items that I took with me, or getting rid of the things that, say that I went to a house and I took a spirit out of it. Instead of going right away and getting rid of it, I would sit there and let it sit in the house. Well, I let myself open to a lot of stuff.
I bet you did.
So those are all the things that's like, I shouldn't have done that. I should have, this is what I should have done. I should have known better. And I did know better. I was just, at the time, I was just too lazy. I was young and figured I knew everything, and I was indestructible. And now it's like reality has come and bit me in the ass and has been, you ain't indestructible, so you better start doing what you're supposed to do, or you're going to get hurt more than what you already are.
I find this fascinating because I'm absolutely wiser, but I'm absolutely sure I'm not more careful. I'm more skilled. I'm more able. I can start things up and shut things down faster than ever before. I'm probably the best at what I do in my area. I would absolutely say that. But maybe I'm looking at the word careful in a different way. As both of you know, I get involved in some very heavy-duty interactions with demons, and these kinds of things put me in the danger zone all the time. And I'm wondering if it's just that my skill level is so extreme at this point that I just walk right in and do what has to be done. Am I more careful? I don't know if I'm more careful. I am more selective. I am less likely to get involved with other human beings on this level. I mean, I don't even really like to, sit close to people at dinner, or I might not even, people put their hand out to shake my hand or to hug me all the time, and that never happens. I say, I'm sorry, I'm not available to do that. I know that can be a little off-putting, but aside from the people that I'm close to, that is just the way it is. I am very much what I am, and that's that. But I think it's very interesting what we will do now and what we wouldn't do then, and vice versa, and where our practice goes. It is 10:15, and in a minute I would like to talk a little bit about a diagnostic ritual to figure out what's happening. Because, and I'm sure the two of you see this all the time, people come to you and they don't know what's wrong. Don't you have that experience?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, or like you were saying about, I don't know what's wrong, but it's like I'm unlucky.
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
That's when you have to sit down and say, well, where do you get the idea that you're unlucky?
Yeah.
Or none of my relationships work, or, you have to figure out why, if there is a spiritual reason, or is it just, you're a putz and nobody likes you.
Yeah. And there's Chris right there. You're a putz. There's Chris right there, bringing it to us, bringing us all back to the earth. When I meet people who come to me with these kinds of things, I say to myself, am I going to ask them to do a diagnostic tool, or am I going to do it? And the reality is, for me, is that I always do it. So when I thought about what to say tonight in terms of a ritual and a diagnostic tool, I really had to think outside of the way that I usually do things, although I'm still relying on the methodology that I use. So when we talk about working at the diagnostic level, it is similar to discover what kind of debris is on you, either from your own work or the work of others, as we've talked about for over an hour tonight. It could be any of those things. It could be your own dabbling. It could be even those individuals who take practice seriously can make errors while learning. This is why I think it is valuable, not absolutely vital, but valuable to have a teacher, which is why I became one, because I had a certain understanding that people were utilizing the work, and it would be a good thing if they had access to me to talk about it and to help them troubleshoot it as they went along, which all the students do. But I think that as a diagnostic tool, I suggest the following, and this is going to be a little bit of ritual, a little bit of self-introspection when it comes to figuring out what's going on. Because what we're trying to do here is help people understand, if they don't have one of the three of us standing there to help them, or they're not engaging one of the three of us, then what they need to do is, if they choose to do this alone, is do some sort of diagnostic work. And when I go into a situation where I'm dealing with an exorcism, like I've said before, and like I've said a million times before that, my exorcisms are thoroughly effective, but most of them are not very entertaining. There's not the flailing of arms and the carrying on. I mean, this kind of thing goes on only when a demon is virulent, or when there's more than one demon, or when the situation is more complicated than it initially appears. But most of the time, what happens is that I bring them into the iron ring, and we look at what's new, what they weren't born with, what they didn't come onto this planet with, in this physical vessel with, and I take that out. So doing the kind of work that we're talking about tonight, the debris of sorcery, finding the bits and pieces that have either become dislodged from an original work of sorcery, or some people say that we use the word spell, or some sort of magical, if you will, working. Sometimes things become dislodged. For example, you utilize the energy of as a necromancer of a member of the disincarnate or of a demon, either way or both ways, and one can work that entire ritual and forget to free out that individual that they asked to come in, or just have some sort of residual materials or energy hanging around. Now, remember, in my world, that energy does not have to be garnered. It does not have to be brought to you. You don't have to have more energy than you had before. I use the example in my classes about being underwater in a swimming pool. If you're underwater, you don't have to require more water. It's right there. It's just about how you move it. You get around and you get mobile by various types of movement. So working with energy is very much the same thing. So I ask people who are looking to see if they need to call one of us, because this is an interesting thing. Sometimes people will call me and say, or contact me and email me and say, I think something is going on. Sometimes people will say, in 1985, I did this thing to a person who had these skills and I'm still suffering. So not everyone has those kinds of details. And this ritual tonight, or this discussion tonight, is directed at the people who don't know for sure. And I ask you, if you're going to do this, to do the following thing. And we do a thing called the iron ring, where we separate ourselves from the energy that's touching us. We push it out and we work with it in a thickness, in a different method of condensement, if you will, so that energy flows in and out of it. It can stopgap things. It can hold things in real time. It can be used to move things around. It has almost a gelatinous sense to it as it's packed around you. And some of the people who will listen to this show tonight are in archive, which seems to be where more people listen to it. They will know, some of them will know what the iron ring is, and they'll form one, and they'll understand what I'm saying. For those who don't, I suggest that you stand in the densest way of being in your own energy, pushing on it so that it's packing around you, and that will be sort of the layman's version of what the iron ring is, and you're inside of it well protected, because we're going to use that energy, that condensed, packed-in energy, to look at portions of ourselves. And I suggest if you're going to do this that you do it in the following way, that you create this density. For those of you who know what the iron ring is, can use that. For those of you who don't, create this density of energy. Just know that it is allowed to pack itself tightly around you. If you don't have the skills or you don't understand how the sorcery works in my system, then that's fine. What you're doing is you're allowing as much energy that is around you to get closer and closer and closer, and then just push it slightly away so you're inside of it, almost like a tunnel, in a capsule, if you will. And in that place, we're going to start to look at various aspects of our lives. We're going to separate ourselves in two ways. First, we're going to separate ourselves by deconstructing that which we do and looking at a day in our life or a year in our life, whatever kind of chronological grouping you can grasp. For some people, thinking about just the afternoon is enough or more than they can take, and some people can look at the last 10 years of their lives. And when we float that into this energy and we look at it, we will start to feel a sense of separation from looking at it as if we're watching it in a film. And in that separation, we'll see a second layer of separation where we start to see that which we understand to be intrinsic to ourselves, our methods, our motives, the things that we choose to do, part of our day, our plan, what we expected out of this time period, whatever time period we're choosing. And then we start to look at what's affecting it. And if we just allow the energy to act as a filter, and if we do not overprescribe the story, if we just observe it as if we are not writing it, but just experiencing it, and we see ourselves in this sort of looking at ourselves from the side, not quite being in ourselves for a moment, and we notice that there are interruptions in this period of time. Just allow those interruptions to take a shape or a color. Just allow them to be maybe a shot of energy or just a splinter or a bolt of some kind. And just let them be what they are, and you'll see them floating around. And what will happen is you will notice whether or not there are a lot of them. Everybody has some of them. And you'll notice whether they are allowing you to get through your day or year or month or decade, whatever you're looking at, or if they seem to be sourced out. If you are seeing your vessel as walking through its period of time that you've discerned and chose to work with, and you see these other objects coming at it over and over, then there is a strong possibility that work has been done to you. In this sort of diagnostic moment, you'll be able to see these external forces pressing down upon you. And take note in this time whether you feel connected to those forces, separated from them, oppressed by them, whatever it is that you're feeling. This is the diagnostic tool, is your deepest level of reaction, what you experience and what you think is happening when you see these shots, these disassociated bits of energy and objects around the self that you see as trying to get through a period of time. When you're done with that, take data, take notes, do it a second and third time, and see if you're seeing the same objects, the same interrupters, the same confusions, the same things that feel like they don't belong to your experience. And if the data matches a number of times, then there is a very good chance that there is some kind of pervasive external force upon your activity. And when you've done that, and when you feel like you have some data from that, separate away from this and do it again. And this time, look at your physicality, your state of wellness, your body, your ability to function in this vessel. Look at your blood. Look at the way your legs move. Look at the way you walk. Look at the energy that you have, that you perceive as energy, that which you're moving through time in. See if your physicality is experiencing these same interruptions. And if your physicality is, in fact, perceiving similar interruptions, daggers that come from somewhere, bolts that come from somewhere, shocks, things that seem unrelated to the natural progression of your body moving in time. And do this 2 or 3 times, just like you did the first one. And see if and take some data and write down what you experience. And revisit it as many times as you need to, the physicality of yourself, what you're experiencing, to see what's happening. And then step away from that and do it a 3rd time, examining facets of your thought process. allow your thought process to become an entity in the iron ring or in this thickness of energy, floating in this gelatinous mass of energy that belongs in close proximity to you. And look at it and see if it's interrupted. And see if it's interrupted by your own desires to slow down or move forward, or your own procrastinations, or your own need for perfection. This is different. This is fine. This belongs to you, and it's for another time and another show. If those things are things you want to work on, that's a separate issue. If you find, once again, these similar sort of shocks of energy, these bits of disassociated energy, these marks, these daggers, these dots, these whatever they are, whatever they show up as, looking at yourself in the virtual perspective this way. And you see that they are repeated once again. And do it 2 or 3 times. Step away from it, go back. A day can pass if you like. And look at it again. And see if you, once again, see these similar floating objects, these objects that seem not related to the DNA of your thought pattern. And after you've done that, you have 3 sets of data. And then what you will do is, without the sense of the iron ring, without the sense of the thickness of this material of energy around you, in the pure cognitive experience, you will look at this data, and you will see whether or not you feel there is evidence in these 3 areas that you are, in fact, impacted by the desire, the choice, the actions, the will, the focus of others who are coming towards you. If that's the data that you get, then it is up to you whether or not you want to proceed and look and see if this is debris that has been created by your own either dabbling or confusion or methodology, or whether it comes from someone else upon you. It is my suggestion to you, listeners, that once you get this diagnostic material, this data down, that the decision of where the materials come from is very difficult for the individual to see for themselves, because their own impression of their own work sits in the bias on this thing. It is at this point that it is very helpful to bring in another person to look at these materials and to see if the data matches with their diagnosis, mine, Morgan's, Chris, these kinds of people, other students of mine, other people that you can go to who work high-frequency sorcery, the kind of sorcery where you don't have to, they're not looking at your palm and there's no tarot cards being thrown. The kind of work that requires an eye on the energy, the kind of people who can do that kind of work. And then when you go to them, make a decision about whether or not you are ready to let go of having a life encumbered by these kinds of things. So that is the process of the self-diagnosis. And it is also similar to the process that I do with clients when they come to me, whether in person or otherwise. And I separate them out in this way, and I look and see what's attached and what they came in with. That is the best and clearest process. Students who work with me, people who understand my work, understand how doing so in the iron ring makes for perfection in this kind of diagnostic work. So I leave that with you tonight. Any comments on that by my on-air associates?
I have one about what you just said about going on with your life. I've found a lot of times, too, is do people really want to give this up when they find out that there's something wrong with them? It's almost like some people invite it. That it gives them a reason that their life is horrible.
Well, Chris, remember I said before that there are clients that come to me. More men do this more than women. That's just been my experience. It's not a judgment call. Where I can diagnose exactly what's happening, exactly what kind of person. By kind of person, I mean the person that has a certain proximity to their life. Sometimes it's their lover. Sometimes it's someone they met 10 years ago on a bus. Has a very different kind of energy. And I can say, well, you know what, I actually think this is the person you sleep with at night. This is the person you touch every day, and this is coming from them. And they will say to me, and I have to tell you, I'm a little startled every single time I hear it. Yes, but I love her.
Right.
And so to your point, yes, I'm very glad you asked that question. There are people who identify with suffering. and they want to continue to identify with suffering. And for those people, this cure is available, but it's not well received.
Because I've found that too, where people have asked me for help, and when I tell them what needs to be done, it's like, well, I don't know. It's like, well, why did you come to me for in the first place? If you don't want it fixed, that would be like, when I was a mechanic, it's like bringing your car to me and then I tell you what's wrong with it, and no, I don't give free estimates anymore. It's either you get it fixed or you don't.
Chris, I get clients that come to me all the time with serious relationships and some serious physical violence. And they come to me because they want to figure out some kind of strength position for themselves to be able to get out. And I often have an oversimplified answer for that, but that being set aside, then they say, well, maybe I don't want to leave that person. So there are definitely people who identify with suffering on a profound level, and there's nothing you can do. And it's okay, because that's not your client. Not everyone is your client. People come to me in that state of mind, and they say, well, I've tried to leave him 6 times or 7 times. And I say, well, unless you're conjoined twins, I don't really see what the problem is here. There are people who do not want to be better. They want somebody else who they haven't told their story to yet to have to listen. Sometimes that becomes us. What do you think about that?
Oh, I believe that. I think a lot of times we take the place of psychiatrists and things like that, and it's like, that's not my job. My job isn't to listen to you and give you psychological advice and things like that. You come to me for spiritual stuff. If you need me to take care of things that are wrong with you, with your energy or mystical things like that, fine. I'm not going to sit here and diagnose what happened to you when you were a kid. Look, I'm sorry your mom didn't breastfeed you, but that's not my concern.
That's going way far back, huh?
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. It's like, that is not my concern. I can't help you with that. I can help you with other things. This is the person you need to get rid of, or this is the thing you need to get rid of in your life, and this will make you better. Well, I can't do that. Well, I can't help you. I'm sorry. That's it. It's done. We're finished.
Mm-hmm.
Now, well, what if we can't do something else? This is what needs done. I can't put duct tape on this. This gotta disappear. That's all it's to it. And the biggest thing is, we've talked about this before, is when I tell people they have to get out of the house. Well, I live there. Well, I can't do what I need to do if you're living in the house.
Yes, that's an interesting one. I agree with you. That's an interesting one. I've had clients who I say, listen, somebody has to get out of that house. And right. It's either going to be the 6 people whose bodies are buried under that house, or the 6 people who died in that house, and that's a complex thing, or you who happen to just be renting. I would go with you. And some people don't want to do that. I hear that all the time. I had a client who was talking to me on Skype, in the bed, totally physically disabled in a profound way, and here's the language, since he moved into the house. Back problems, leg problems, neck problems. I mean, exhaustive litany of this and that. I said, well, is it toxic? Maybe there's something. No. And as we're going, and I'm seeing all these people walking around the house. I'm seeing shadows. I said, you're not alone? I said, no, I'm alone. I said, no, you're not. And I saw quite a few people in a state of rage, in anger. And I said, well, what do you know about this house? And he said, well, it's kind of a quirky thing. There were 3 suicides over 12 years in this house. I said, really?
There's going to be a 4th.
That's what I said. I said, so far. I said, what can you tell me about this? He said, well, there were people in chronic pain. I said, so this is not ringing a bell for you? He said, well, look, I just painted. And I said, well, that's going to be the most expensive paint you've ever bought in your whole life, because unless you get out of there, you're going to be next. This was 3 months ago. He is hospitalized now in chronic pain all the time, and in and out of the hospital, back and forth into that house. we had one more Skype session, and he wanted to talk to me, and I said, I don't really have anything to say to you. I either have to come there and remove all of those entities, or you have to leave that house. And he said to me, you know, I know that this wasn't originally the bedroom. And I said, okay, well, what was it? And he said, well, this was the room that two of them hung themselves in. And I thought, you know what, I can't do anything for you because you don't want anything done for you. I said, you're becoming one of those people who identifies with this drama. And, you know, when somebody wants to do that, they're all in. Like we say in poker, they're all in.
Yep. I
Morgan,
can't
you have
help
any
you
thoughts?
at this point.
Yeah, it's too late. It's not even too late. It's that they don't want to be helped. They want somebody new to tell their story to. You know, in the book Divination, I went really far into telling people who work as divinators, if you want to use that word, the most important thing they will ever learn, which is how to deal with the client. And, you know, people who listen, if that sounds cold, then there's nothing I can do about that. Because clients are not always what they seem. Sometimes they are just people who want a new friend. They want, you know, they want some kind of intimate relationship with you in a sense of immediacy. And this happens whether you are healing them, solving their problem, reading them, all these kinds of things happen. And I say this sometimes to clients about their own suffering. I say, this is a relationship you're having, and there's no room for anyone else in this relationship, including the person you've hired to break it up. So there's nothing I intend to do going forward. Mark, can you have any thoughts on that?
Well, the first thing I'm thinking after that story you told is that you have a lot more patience than I do, because if it had been me, it would have been 3 suicides and a murder in that house. But
well, you know what it is? I'm always there for the disincarnate, so I'm trying to make a deal that make it best for the disincarnate, and that's why I'll even have the second conversation sometimes, because I want to get him out of there so that they don't have to live through this again, because they are just going to see it again. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. I just, I can, and he thought it was a good idea to move his bed into the room where everybody hanged themselves. I just, but anyway, but you're right about these things.
Yeah.
Well, okay, fine. You know, it's the guy who you pull out of the riptide and then he goes jumping right back into the ocean.
Yeah.
I have had people who don't want to give up their misery too, and it's hard to deal with them. They've always got something, and this is one of the reasons why my approach is a pretty holistic approach. I'm trying to get people's life back into balance. I'm not trying to put a Band-Aid on it. Well, if you have problems with love relationships, well, we'll just do a quick working for that. Or you're having a string of bad luck or bad business is happening if you happen to own your own business, or you're having a tough job situation, well, we'll just put a Band-Aid on that. My goal is to get their whole life back into balance. And that's really part of the root of the African diaspora religions like voodoo is it's not about going around doing work all the time. It's not about doing rituals all the time. You're only supposed to do those to correct the balance. The ideal is that your life is supposed to be good and prosperous and happy at all times. And that's what I try to do. But some people, if I help them with the problem, they'll just come back with another problem. They keep coming back over and over and over again. But when I try to bring up the subject of, well, you really need a deeper work that is going to balance your whole life, they don't want to do it. They don't want to put the time or effort into it. And they just, well, can you just do this one little thing for me? Well, you know, I could do this one little thing for you, but you're going to be back on my doorstep next week. And that's not how I want to use my energy. I want to use my energy to help people lead fulfilling, balanced lives. That's my goal. That's part of my practice, and one of the reasons I chose this particular path is because of its emphasis on that. So there are times when I just have to say, like both of you, I can't do anything. You know, I really cannot help you, because the intrinsic problem you have is not your love relationship. It's not your bad luck. The intrinsic problem you have goes much deeper, and that's what I want to fix with you. But if you won't let me get into that, if you won't let me get that deep into your energy and realign everything, then I'm hamstrung, because even if I put my Band-Aids on those problems, you're going to have something else within a couple weeks.
You know, people are always surprised when I say no to them. They think, but I came to you. So I think there's this sense that as people in this business, if there certainly is a business side to it, that we are just always going to say yes. That is so not the case. Absolutely not the case.
Yeah.
I say no more often than I say yes. I say yes most of the time to readings because I am not sure what's going to happen from it, and that's sort of an open door. But I say no much more often to sorcery work than I say yes. You have to, because people will come to you with all kinds of crazy stuff, and they are not necessarily interested in getting better. I mean, I've had clients who ask for X, Y, and Z. They get X, Y, and Z in 4 days or less, or whatever kind of time period, and then they say, I'm not sure I got enough results out of that. Let's do a little more. And I think to myself, this is going to be one of these people who, like you were saying, Morgan, is going to be there all the time looking for you to solve every single problem. And then, I will have somebody call me and say, the neighbors downstairs are loud, so can you do sorcery on them? So, not everybody wants to be fixed. The debris that people create sometimes is them creating it themselves in an ongoing way. And that's kind of important to be able to see. So it's 22, and I feel like I want to give people a chance to absorb the ritual and to think about what we've talked about and to be able to send us questions. I actually this evening have to move on to discuss the removing of a demon from someone's home. So I think that for the evening I will be leaving a little bit early, and if that's okay with the two of you, then perhaps we could go ahead and wrap the show up for the night and talk about how to find who we are and how to find us. Is that okay with everybody? Morgan,
sure.
You want to start?
Sure, I will. My full name is Morgan St.Knight. You can reach me at morganstknight@hotmail.com. You can also reach me through the website for my book. My book is called The Curse of Prometheus, and the website is talesofmedea.com. My address, my email address, as well as the email addresses for the Sorceress and Chris and Victor as well, who wasn't able to join us tonight, are all on on the episode page for this particular episode of the show. So if you are listening through the computer rather than listening through calling in, you will notice that we have our email links all at the top, as well as the link to our website, which is darkmattersradiocagliastro.com. You can click on all of those links, and they will take you directly to those pages.
Thank you, Morgan. Chris?
And you can find me on my Facebook page at helsrogue, or you can find me through my email at helsrogue, HELS, @gmail.com. That's also listed on the page for Blog Talk.
And thank you, Chris. And I'm the Sorceress Cagliastro, Blood Sorceress, Necromancer, The Hand of Nine. You can find me just about anywhere on the internet if you Google my name, but my website is cagliastrotheironring.com. And I want to say that as of January, my online classes are going to be split into two areas, beginners and people who are already familiar with the work. The beginner class only has 12 seats. 2 of them are gone already, and it starts in January. So if you're interested in that, cagliastrotheironring.com. All the books are on Amazon. And the way to find me, if you have questions, is quite simply sorceresscagliastro@gmail.com. I keep it as simple as possible. sorceresscagliastro@gmail.com. And, of course, my information is all over the Blog Talk Radio site and the wonderful site that Morgan built for us that she has already told us all about. So thank you for listening tonight, and in a day or two you will see information about what our next show is. And this has been Dark Matters Radio with Sorceress Cagliastro, and I appreciate the time of my on-air personalities and our listeners. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.